Hello, this is James Rivera, and I'm here to discuss my seventh book, David Bowie and Romanticism, published by Palgrave Macmillan in 2022. The first thing I want to say about it is my daughter Becca. This is the second book cover she did for me. She did this one. It's obviously the famous Wanderer on the Sea of Fog image that I encouraged Becca to modify to vaguely kind of imitate the Earthling album cover by David Bowie in the mid-late 90s. So we had some fun with that. She did too. I think it was a lot of work for her, actually. And I'm grateful for her work, Becca Rovera, my daughter. So this book, it really started in 2016 when Bowie died. It just broke my heart. And the two things that were going on, of course, was that we were losing this beautiful, humane, creative genius, David Bowie, and getting in exchange Donald Trump, as when Trump's star started to rise in the political arena. In January of 2016, I don't think anyone believed he'd actually be elected president, but here we are. So most of it, though, was just being heartbroken, over David Bowie's death. He was a fixture in my life in the 70s. I was never like a Bowie freak, like I had to own all his albums. And I didn't have like Bowie memorabilia or posters in my bedroom or anything like that. But his music was a part of my life throughout the 70s. And the coverage, I'm very pleased with the coverage. There are certain minimum topics I felt like had to be covered in any book about David Bowie and Romanticism. And keep in mind, we're talking about Romanticism as the aesthetic movement that starts around the mid to late 18th century and is typically periodized to the early to mid 19th century. I continue to work consistently with a definition of Romanticism by Sayre and Louvy that defines it as a reaction to modernity, which is a combination of capitalism and Enlightenment. And the rise of capitalism and Enlightenment, modernity in that form, people start to feel more disconnected from each other, more atomized, more separated from nature, from culture, from society. And romanticism is a reaction to that. It's an emotional reaction that manifests itself in a number of different ways. So what they usefully do is provide a coherent definition of romanticism, a core that expresses itself a number of different ways. So you have a taxonomy of romanticisms that account for the many differences we see in Romantic era products. Because, you read it and it seems romantic, you read this other thing and it seems romantic, but at the same time, it's hard to really define what they have in common. Sometimes they can be very different. So, and David Bowie, he's probably one of the most well-read, he was probably one of the most well-read people on the planet. I've read that he carried trunks of books with him everywhere he went, maybe, up to 400 books. He was just constantly reading. He wasn't reading professionally as a scholar. He was reading to feed his imagination. And he read literature that goes way back. I think he joked once that he didn't read anything written after 1500 or 1600, which obviously isn't true. But it did, express his interest in literature that goes farther back into the early modern era and probably before. And that too is a key facet of Romanticism, nostalgia, a sense of nostalgia, a sense that we lost something in the past and we're trying to get it back. And I'm sure you've heard that a lot. And it comes from many different political orientations, and that is why we need a taxonomy of romanticisms rather than, romanticism is just this one thing. So, after my introduction, David Bowie and Romanticism, and what that does is it covers Bowie's life and career up to about 1969 and theorizes Bowie as a romantic. And what that provides background for the entire rest of the book. because the writing about Bowie really begins with Space Oddity in the late 60s, and then goes forward from there all the way to Black Star, which was his last album right before he died. And I remember watching the video. I don't remember which Black Star video it was, but it came out like right before he died. And I remember noticing that in 24 hours it had 1 million hits. And I was very pleased. And I hope he knew that, that he was still on top. That people, still cared about his music and his creativity, his creative productions, not just the music, but the video as well. So after that, that's followed by a chapter I wrote, David Bowie and Romantic Androgyny, and then Negative Capability in Space, a Romantic Bowie verse by Shauna Gunther, which is, about David Bowie's space identity, as we've seen in Space Oddity and songs going forward. Drug Use and Drug Literature from the 18th Century to David Bowie by Eric Pellerin. Capitalist Co-optation, Romantic Resistance, and Bowie's Allegorical Performance. And Nicholas Roeg's The Man Who Fell to Earth, William Levine. Too Late to Be Late Again, David Bowie, the late 1970s and Romanticism, which is Julian Knox's complex discussion of both romantic nostalgia and Bowie's own. Paul Stephen Rose, The Relics of the Future, the Melancholic Romanticism of Bowie's Berlin Triptych. Rebel Rebel by Samuel Lyndon Gladden, Bowie as romantic type, and that intersects with celebrity culture. Aglia Moretta Venters, The Goblin King, Absurdity and Non-Binary Thinking. Obviously, she's writing about Labyrinth, the movie. And then again, I have another chapter, and this chapter is ridiculously long. It's 42 pages. I almost wrote half this book, seriously, because my introduction is long. My chapters are long. One Outside. The people generally call the album Outside now, but it was originally titled One Outside because it was supposed to be part of a series of 5 albums actually released from when this one came out to the turn of the 21st century. As Bowie's Gothic technodrama, Fascism and the Irrational near the turn of the millennia. And finally, Jennifer Lillian Lodine Chaffee, Black Star, David Bowie's 21st Century Ars Moriendi. So the topics covered are exactly, the minimal topics I'd want to cover in any book about David Bowie, which would be his space persona, his androgyny, his complex sexual identity, especially in the 70s and somewhat in the 80s. Drug use, especially in the 70s. Oh my God. The movies, The Man Who Fell to Earth and Labyrinth, those are his 2 big movies. A couple of chapters on the Berlin trilogy with some different approaches. Bowie as a romantic type across his career and within celebrity culture. And then Bowie and fascism in the Gothic. And then Black Star. All right, those are like the minimal topics. And I actually picked the topics I was going to write about based on what wasn't covered. So I waited until I saw the completed chapters I had, and I thought, okay, well, there's there's mention of Bowie's androgyny in different chapters, but there's no full discussion of it. And there's mention of maybe Bowie and fascism here and there, but no full discussion of it. So those were my chapters. I wrote a 30-page introduction and then a 22-page chapter on Bowie and romantic androgyny, and then a 42-page chapter on Bowie's album One Outside. So I wrote about, over 70 pages. That's about a third of the book, I guess. Not really what I intended. I didn't intend to write anything that was quite that long, but I did. And I felt like I had to. And just so that you know, Samuel Gladden and I are working on another Bowie anthology, David Bowie is, with a period after every word. The title is taken from his exhibit at the Victoria and Albert Museum in Canada. And our goal with this collection is to talk about undercovered or underrepresented aspects of Bowie's career, such as Bowie as a producer, an album producer, and he produced some famous albums, and Bowie's lesser known films, and Bowie as a painter, and things like that. So it's coming together nicely. Samuel Gladden and I are going to be talking about it and seeing where we're going. And we have interviews also with people who worked with Bowie during his lifetime. One I know is with Davide De Angelis, Bowie's artist in the late 90s, who did the album covers and the album work for Outside. That was not just an album cover. That was an entire production, because he's telling a story with different characters and different scenes and different events, and everything had a visual setting. And Davide did all that. It's amazing. And then he also did the album cover for Earthling, and he did other work with David Bowie as well. If you look up, he's selling Starman products. So look him up online. And I think you'll be amazed at his work. It's just, it is amazing. So look forward for that second collection on David Bowie by Samuel Gladden and myself. David Bowie is hopefully next year, hopefully no later in 2027. I want to talk a little bit about what I wrote, David Bowie and Romantic Androgyny. When I sat down to think about David Bowie, the thing that stood out the most was his performance, I believe, New Year's Eve in 1979 on Saturday Night Live. He performed 3 songs, and he had 3 different outfits for them. And now his head, from the neck up, he looked the same. He had very heavy makeup on. He's made up like a woman, but very heavily like a woman. I don't think most women would wear that much makeup. And he had a really thick kind of, reddish blonde hair at the time that you see on the cover of Low. But the body underneath the head rotated around. It changed. Okay, so the first song, he's in a tuxedo doll suit. Okay, he's completely rigid in this suit. It's like he is a giant tuxedo doll. And even his arms are like pinned to his side by the suit. It's like a big plastic thing. His backup singers had to lift him up by his hands, which were turned down. They had to lift him up by that and carry him forward and set him in front of the mic. And then he sang. Okay, so it was a male tuxedo doll suit, but it was completely rigid. Okay. For the second song, he was dressed in a woman's, like, I don't know if I'd call it a business suit, because it was purple. And he had, I think, kind of gray or lavender stockings on and pumps. I don't remember what color they were. Maybe they were purple too. But he was dressed and moving freely, okay, in the women's clothing. And then in the third song, he was wearing a green screen suit, and he'd keep his arms extended, and a puppet body, a male puppet body, was projected over the suit, and it was kind of dancing hysterically and uncontrollably. And what I do is I compare that, drawing from some queer scholarship on Milton's Paradise Lost, that talks about angelic sex, because Adam and Eve has an extended conversation. Adam and Eve have an extended conversation. Mostly Adam. Eve leaves and basically tells Adam, you can tell me later. I'll get the food. Mary Wollstonecraft hated that. Oh, you menfolk talk and I'll get the victuals. Mary Wollstonecraft hated that. Anyways, so Adam and Raphael are talking, and the angel Raphael, and he asks if angels have sex. And what's interesting is the angel kind of blushes like a cartoon figure, because the entire body changes like pink and then it calms down to white. But Adam's asking innocently. This is before the fall. He's like a kid. He's just curious. So, if a kid asks a question, you try to answer. And apparently, Raphael's answer, actually, unquestionably, Raphael's answer is that yes, angels do have sex, but in all different kinds of forms, because angels are intelligences, they're spirits, but they can control their physical form. So they can be completely in physical bodies that have weight and mass, and like flesh, okay? Or they can be completely in spiritual form at will. And he said we can make ourselves women, or we can make ourselves men physically, or we can make ourselves both at the same time, and we can have sex in all three different kinds of bodies. Okay? And then on top of that, we can be completely pure spirit, and the two angels who are pure spirit can just completely intermingle with one another. And that would be angelic spiritual intercourse, okay? If you could call it that without a body. And I compare that in Milton to romantic androgyny. And remember, androgyny can mean both without sex and also both sexes. And I'm talking about biological androgyny here. And then I compare that with David Bowie's performances at the end of 1979, where he had these different bodies rotate under the same head. So I suggest that that's what queerness meant to David Bowie. It was a very romantic kind of definition that originates in Milton, and I argue in the rock and romanticism, post-punk, goth, and metal, that romanticism actually is inaugurated by Milton in Paradise Lost. And I would say he inaugurated a romantic view of sexuality and angelic sex that is carried forward by several of the romantics, including Percy Shelley. And Blake has figures who change form as well. And David Bowie was whether he drew from that literature or not directly, he was expressing the same kind of idea that the body changes underneath the head based on the object of desire. Okay, so sexual identity, even bodily form, is fluid, and finds different expressions based on what, like, say, the head. I don't know if that's the best way to say it, wants. Okay. And that's what I say about David Bowie and romantic androgyny. My chapter on the album One Outside and Fascism, it begins with David Bowie's rather controversial and ridiculous statement in an interview in 1976 with Cameron Crowe, where he said, "I believe very strongly in fascism." Okay, and I'm like, I read that. I'm like, no, you don't. Because from 1970, he was slamming fascism. His consistent stance toward fascism from 1970 until, I think I follow him until his Tin Machine period, the 90s, is like, no. Just that one interview, he says that ridiculous thing. Now, so I have to account for it and look at what he means by it. And for one thing, that was during the period of his heaviest cocaine use, and Eric Pellerin's chapter contributes to our understanding of that. And even to Cameron Crowe, he was starting to demonstrate signs of cocaine psychosis. He could not sit still for very long. He was just very jumpy. And other reports say he weighed about 90 pounds, and he was living on milk and peppers. He realized he was like this close to dying. And he had to get out of the United States, get away from the drugs. And that's when he moved to Berlin with Iggy Pop and his then wife, who soon separated from him, his first wife, and, late 70s. And that moving away from the United States and people throwing drugs at him all the time probably saved his life. And he made that decision in part because he wanted to be a father. And I don't think there's enough attention paid to Bowie as a father. And I get the impression once he really owned being a father, even before he consciously owned it, he was a good father. I need to talk about that. I observe his history of talking about fascism completely negatively. He began with the song "The Superman," and he says that Hitler arose and developed his fascistic ideology because he was afraid of the true Übermensch, and he was trying to suppress it, which was really interesting. And obviously that's a negative evaluation of fascism. And then when you read the interview, he makes it clear he thought that the fascists in Nazi Germany were terrible, including their suppression of art. Bowie would never suppress that. And what he's really talking about is authoritarianism, because the entertainment industry, many private business environments are run in an authoritarian fashion. One person's in charge, everyone else works for them. And what he expresses in his desire for a brief, and he says just for a little while, a more authoritarian form of government is to take care of these problems quickly that liberalism is taking too long to address, and then go back to a more democratic form of government. He was talking about an authoritarianism to speed things up. And he also talked about Hitler as kind of political performance theater, and how he staged as Leni Riefenstahl's film, Triumph of the Will, staged all of Berlin as a set in a sense. And as film, it's remarkable, even though its purposes were horrible. And he was also talking about, Hitler and the way he moved and the way he spoke and his charisma. So he was talking about authoritarianism in a performative sense, in a way that could conceivably transform society. He still shouldn't have said it. Yeah, he was on drugs, but he didn't really mean support of fascism. And shortly afterwards, he's talking again about how terrible fascism is. And all the details are in the book. Now we get to the connection of Romanticism when we talk about Sayer and Loewy's discussion of fascistic Romanticism. Fascism is characterized by nostalgia for the past. The aesthetic in Leni Riefenstahl's Triumph of the Will is Romanesque. It's Roman. Even the current Trump movement and conservatism always points to the past as some kind of ideal time, which it never was. Because you know what they were doing in the past? Pointing back to the past as some kind of ideal time. Read Flannery O'Connor is a Good Man is hard to find. Read carefully the scene when they're at Red Sammy's barbecue. 1953, used to be you could leave your doors unlocked. You can't do that anymore. You know what the problem is? We're sending all our money to Europe. Why are we doing that when you have people here who have problems? They were saying that in 1953, man. And we idealize the 50s as the good old days. Come on. Okay? So nostalgia, in a sense, is always a lie. We never know how good we have it until later when we've lost it. Fascistic Romanticism in Sayer and Loewy is motivated by two impulses: a desire to change things rapidly and a reliance on technology. And there you have it. That is Bowie in a nutshell in that badly conceived interview. I will say Cameron Crowe, a true gentleman of an interviewer, asked Bowie at the end of the interview if he would like to retract anything that he said. And Bowie did say only the more controversial things. Bowie's father was in PR. he liked saying and doing things that attracted a lot of attention. And he was doing that at the time also to build his career. His statement coming out that he is a homosexual, and I discussed this in my chapter on romantic androgyny, was very attention-getting and controversial in England. And then when he came over here and said the same thing, he regretted it because suddenly everybody wanted him to be a target or a poster boy. And the poster boy kind of stuck. There's a great reception history of David Bowie. It's right there on my shelf, and I can't read the title. I really should script these things, but I don't. I apologize. Just type in reception history David Bowie, and you'll find it. It's a great collection of essays. And one of them interviewed people from all walks of life about Bowie, and a gay teenage boy in 2016, after David Bowie died, said, we're doomed, our guardian angel is dead. So young gay men were looking to David Bowie to be their guardian angel as recently as the year of his death, 2016. So that kind of stuck. At the time, some members of the gay community were saying, look, he's married, he's a tourist. And other members were taking it seriously. And then, of course, the people who didn't like that were reacting negatively. And Bowie, after a while, just wanted everybody to shut up about it. So that was in the United States. In England, it kind of had the effect he wanted. It was controversial. It gained some attention. And then they moved on. But not here, not in the United States. So that's David Bowie and Romanticism. Okay. Order it for your college and university library. Interesting studies that improve our understanding of both David Bowie and Romanticism. Thank you for listening.